Last week, President Ramaphosa hosted the inaugural National Dialogue Eminent Persons meeting at the Union Buildings, where he outlined the task ahead for the group. Now, some of the key objectives of the dialogue revolved around public trust, equality, and social cohesion. Now, the process comes amid mounting corruption, recent claims against politicians, police leaders and the judiciary by KZN Police Commissioner Indlulamithi. Let's discuss this now with Xolela Kashe-Katiya, the project leader at Indlulamithi South Africa Scenarios 2035, an initiative to stimulate a national conversation about social cohesion in South Africa. Good morning, Xolela, and thank you so much for your time.
Good morning, Masichaba, and good morning to your viewers at home.
Now, Indlulamithi has been advocating for a national dialogue for some time now. So how does it feel to see this finally gaining momentum?
It is very encouraging for us, as you correctly say, that it has been some time. You will recall that there's been attempts at having a national dialogue. If you go back to 2013, the Cape Town Convention, which was led by the Department of Arts and Culture then, and this was followed by also yet another attempt, and that was also led by the Department of Arts and Culture, which took place just before COVID in 2020. And this is because that department is also tasked with the project of social cohesion in the country. So if you look closely at their programs, there are all these attempts at finding ways to get South Africans to find each other. However, the research that we've done on social compacts, which we proposed as a tool towards social cohesion in the country, it requires that a project such as this one, it has to be led from the highest office. So that's why I'm saying it's encouraging, because that has always been our findings since 2018, when Indlulamithi started with the scenarios with the view of encouraging dialogue. Then we found that perhaps this is not correctly located at the Department of Arts and Culture, and it should be elevated to the presidency. So seeing that happen now for us is one of the things that we find that it's a move in the right direction. However, with the trust deficit that you've already pointed to, it might be a little bit too late, because society at large does not necessarily trust the state, especially in the wake of all the events that have taken place in the past few weeks.
Now, looking at your 2030 scenarios, right? Xolela, you identified several groupings that are visible in our current state of affairs: the loss of public trust, the need for social cohesion solutions, and people needing to be at the center of solving problems. How accurately do the Mkhwanazi allegations and public response fit your scenarios?
Well, I mean, the three scenarios are quite nuanced. So you would find that we have three key drivers that inform the three storylines. So whatever is happening right now, you would find various aspects of it across the three different scenarios, because the key driver that informs what is happening right now is that of state capacity. We have identified state capacity as one of the three key driving forces that would inform our various futures. So, I mean, if you look at that, it's about accountability. It's about no consequences, since the Zondo Commission, and then the recapture of key state institutions, including the judiciary, which when we started was still trusted by society. But as you've seen in recent times, it seems like what we imagined as a capture of the judiciary might also start showing. So, I mean, that added to, lack of capacity within all tiers of government is something that then impacts on the delivery of services, but also the lack of accountability, which also speaks to the state's inability to compel business to also fall in to support it, because it has been proven time and time again that the state is not capable. But we cannot have business that folds its arms. Yes, we do have attempts at business coming in, for example, with the Solidarity Fund during COVID, but also most recently with some of the efforts, with the state and business bilaterals. However, the key driver of state capacity and lack of accountability and just sheer corruption that is quite endemic across all tiers.
All right, let's expand on that. Now, the timing, Xolela, seems quite significant. I mean, the president held his inaugural meeting with the Eminent Persons Group on Friday, the same day that he announced that he would address the nation on the Mkhwanazi allegations. Does the current crisis make the national dialogue more urgent?
I think it does make it more urgent. I mean, we should have done this 10 years ago. Because I'm saying this because the timing now, with this environment where there's this trust deficit, there's a lot of suspicion. So everything is viewed with that lens of suspicion. You would have seen the questioning of representation in terms of the eminent persons, but also the timing in terms of the proximity of this project to the local government elections next year. And also just, the processes which seem to be so opaque. And I think in terms of how we can mitigate this trust deficiency, I think transparency, there needs to be a lot more transparency. We've seen how during COVID, these family meetings, such as tonight's family meeting, seems to draw a lot of attention. You do have a lot of South Africans sitting up and listening, especially to the head of state. So the more that is done, even in terms of the process of imagining this dialogue, using the same platforms that would be used tonight to actually engage with society at large, I think that would help in terms of dealing with trust issues.
Yeah, and speaking of society at large, I mean, do you feel that the group is adequately represented, especially from a civil society point of view, the layman?
Well, there has been conversations, especially among civil society actors, wherein there has been a lot of issues raised around that. And these have been communicated to, the task team that is preparing for this. And that you can see that there has been attempts in terms of trying to bring in some youthful faces. But in terms of addressing all our divides, I'm not quite sure, because now our divides are beyond a race. They now have to do with class, but also have to do with age. So I would say, the best way would be to always pay attention to our demographics as a nation, if we were to be that crude, ensuring that, the different proportions are represented, in the way they are reflected. So the easiest way to do it is just to look at Stats SA to see how society is configured. We know that the majority of our society is young people. And of those young people, the majority of them are unemployed. So it would be important to also have that, addressed in terms of the making of all these structures. And of course, we understand that the Eminent Persons Group is only, they will act as advisors or sounding board, those who would actually be kind of like this face of the project. Those who would be quite instrumental are still to be imagined. And I suppose this will happen when the convention happens in August, with the view of then going into communities, engaging with broader society, using town hall approaches and so on. It would be useful to also use platforms such as the ones that they will be utilizing today to ensure that there's this constant communication, but also the faces, they must represent the makeup of South African society.
Now, Xolela, the name Indlulamithi means giraffe, right? So its ability to look above the trees and see beyond human limitations. So from your elevated perspective, What do you see that others might be missing in this current crisis of national security?
Unfortunately, Masichaba, it's not a very pretty picture. Even our best, or what others deem as the best case scenario, we don't like to say this one is the best one, or we don't have that approach of high road and low road. But all three scenarios, the Hadida scenario, the vulture culture, and also even the weaver work scenario that the president likes to reference, they're actually not a pretty sight when you look above the trees, like the giraffe that we're trying to, and that's a messaging that we're trying to spread across the country, that if you look above those trees towards 2035, what we see in the Hadida culture, especially when it comes to this particular issue, is a continuation of what is happening, but the noise growing louder and louder with the blame game. But what is encouraging is that by the time we get to 2035, the majority of those who are above 35 today would have passed on. So then they would be in the minority. So it could change things a bit in terms of youth politics. And also what we see is a youth that had disengaged from dependency on the state and finding ways. So there's a spirit of Vukuzenzele that we see there. So it would be interesting to see what happens then with this youthful independent that is not dependent on the state at all, and how it deals with, how far it takes the noise. Because remember, it's a Hadida nation, it's very noisy. In the second scenario, it gets worse, because there we have a vulture culture, which is a nation that's vulturizing itself. That's where now you see a proper capture of the entire security cluster, including the judiciary, wherein we see criminal syndicates taking over in terms of even the delivery of the most basic services, such as water and so on. The cartels find South Africa to be a destination of choice, like global cartels that is, and South Africa becomes a narco state by 2035. And also South Africans also start then self-medicating with these narcotics to deal with the absolute terror that they have to deal with. In the last scenario, which is the weaver work scenario, what we see in 2035 is there's this rupture that takes place after a long period of unfulfilled promises, but also graft with no consequences, to a point where citizens get absolutely hurtful and they spill out onto the streets. And we draw parallels to the 1990s movement, wherein we saw there was this United Democratic Front that took shape across the nation, basically rendering the state ungovernable. So something similar to that, but once again, a youthful movement with artists and creatives also falling in, using, creative arts like music as a case in point, which has also become very global. So if you were to imagine what had happened in the 90s with that movement, something similar happening now with technology now, you can imagine how far that goes. And then these social movements eventually manage to eject the government, forming their own coalition that then takes the country forward, and that's how then the weaving takes place.
All right, let's pause it right there. Xolela Kashe-Katiya is the Indlulamithi South Africa Scenarios project leader ahead of, last week President Ramaphosa hosted the inaugural National Dialogue Eminent Persons meeting at the Union Buildings, and we will continue this conversation straight after this. Welcome back. This is the Weekend Report. I'm Masachaba Mposwa. We are in conversation with Xolela Kashe-Katiya, the project lead at Indlulamithi South Africa Scenarios 2035, which is an initiative to stimulate a national conversation about social cohesion in South Africa. And now, Xolela, where we'd left off is we were talking about, you mentioned security clusters. Now, let's talk about this now. This is very important. Current allegations that have been made by General Mkhwanazi. What do you think about the current state of security? Do you feel safe in South Africa today?
I don't think there's a single South African that feels safe in South Africa today. I mean, just things that we take for granted. If you listen to people that visit the nation, the first thing they would comment on is our electric fences around our high walls. And unfortunately, it's also the most unequal nation. So those who are able to buy security do somewhat have this sense, this false sense of security, actually, because they're not quite secure. And so you can imagine how then all of that criminality impacts on the poor.
And in your scenario work, what would you say are the consequences if South Africa fails to properly address the issues raised by General Mkhwanazi?
As I've indicated in the three scenarios, I mean, it depends on the decisions that are taken today by both the state, but also its citizens. So the picture that I've painted, it's three different pathways that could take place. Unfortunately, we have not released the first barometer against the scenarios to actually speak with confidence, with data to say we are now in the Hadida scenario or in the vulture culture or weaver culture. So that will happen towards the end of the year. So right now it would just be a speculation. But what we do know for a fact is that by the time we released the scenarios, remember we were starting off on the Gwara scenario of the last ones that we had started with, which was a state of lawlessness. So that's what we are confident about, is that we are in the state of lawlessness. And the reason why we developed new scenarios, because some of the indicators were even worse than that state of lawlessness.
Now, President Ramaphosa has asked the Eminent Persons Group to be critical in its work, as was also reported in the IOL. Does this give you confidence that difficult truths will be confronted?
I certainly do hope that truths will be confronted, but also I'm seeing that there's various groupings that are already opting out. And I mean, there's no utility in only having this conversation with only those that look like ourselves, only those we agree with. So there has to be that moment of, reaching across so that we can find a middle ground. It would be very important, because if we then move on without all the different parts of society, but also, most importantly, those who are not part of the elite, there has to be that bringing on board those people, because as I've said, that class divide has become, one of, the indicators of this, the nature of inequality, and also age divide. So that has to also happen beyond just race or ideology, but we need to really focus on, sufficient representation of young people. And there has to be majority representation of young people. And there has to be representation of the unemployed, young people.
If you had to advise President Ramaphosa on how to use tonight's address to set the right tone for the national dialogue, what would you tell him?
I would tell him, coming from Indlulamithi now, and seeing that he's also referenced our scenarios when he opened his parliament in terms of this new administration. He did reference Indlulamithi scenarios quite a bit and spent quite a lot of time calling us to become like weaver birds. I would advise him to read those scenarios very carefully, because weaving the nation is not just really about weaving the political elite together without the rest. It speaks to, you know, grassroots level weaving, and there is that potential, because if this country were to reach that moment of rupture or that proverbial tipping point, he will be faced with, you know, this united front that would be coming from below. And as we've seen, you know, in terms of the Arab Spring, those movements, just using, you know, a cellular phone, they can actually eject regimes. So you would have to read the Weaver work very carefully and find ways to address some of the, you know, indicators of moments that can be mitigated, and do that right now and be decisive right now.
Xolela Kashe-Katiya, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was the project lead at Indlulamithi South Africa Scenarios 2030.